So when he was CNO, he was working for Ray Mavis. Was he making that 14 months?
Ladies and gentlemen, can I have your attention, please? We're going to kick off the panel session in about 5 minutes, so please move to your seats. Help us with the timely start. I ask you to turn off your electronic devices. And as a reminder, before we get started, the audience members will be invited to ask questions from the standing mics on the floor at the appropriate time. And also at the conclusion of the discussion, please visit the West app and provide your feedback in this session survey.
How are you?
Thank you. 5 minutes. 5 minutes, everybody.
Right now I am, but if everybody else...
No, I think I'll put mine back on.
You want to take jackets off? I'm good with that.
I don't know. I'm
I'm fine with where I'm at.
I feel like it's
yeah. You got the nice long.
These things hot.
I think they are. This is the biggest crowd I've ever seen at West.
Walking into the Yak-Mac. It was, for morning crowd. Must be a lot of East Coast people.
Yeah.
Was it like 3 o'clock in the morning? Well, I'm bug-eyed, ready to go.
That's right.
Is there a hand mic?
No. So we got this, and then
Academy for Aviation.
It's a good turnout here, too.
this is very good.
Tired flags.
A lot of
Sure, you see some press corps circling out there.
yeah.
That's good. Try not to let them. Are there going to be any that are piped in? Like emailed in that you're going to get?
No.
Okay. Are you going to stay up here or can I stand?
You can stay if you want to.
I think I will.
Yeah, I'll just step down there, and then I'll give you the signal when it's time for the last question.
Get next to my friend Bill. Thank you.
Oh.
At this point, it's almost a hobby. Thank you for
Sure. Well, thanks for what you do for us out here at West.
no questions out of that. Y'all ready to do your...
Hey, Stick, how are you? Good to see you.
Good morning, everyone. I'll ask you to take your seats, please, so we can start the first panel session of West. I'm Bill Hamblett from the Naval Institute. I'm the editor-in-chief of Proceedings. It's great to have you all here. This is going to be one of the better or best panel sessions, I think, this week. The best so far, right. So welcome to the panel session, Man, Train, and Equip Perspective. What are the goods and others on readiness, capability, and capacity? I have the pleasure of introducing Admiral Bill Moran, the moderator of the panel. He's a former Vice Chief of Naval Operations. He started his career flying anti-submarine warfare aircraft over the Atlantic. He went on later in his career to fly missions for Operations Iraqi Freedom and Enduring Freedom. He then became the Chief of Naval Personnel before becoming the 39th Vice Chief of Naval Operations. He is now an advisor, strategic advisor to a number of companies, as well as a member of the board of directors of the U.S. Naval Institute. So, Admiral Moran, the panel is yours, sir.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
We have got a hell of a panel here. All these people seem to get along really well. So my objective today is to make them argue with each other. If I don't succeed, I'm going to look to the audience to help me out a little bit. Okay, so we're going to go right to questions. No intros. I think everybody up here knows who these folks are. If you don't, you can look them up on the web and get a lot more information than I'm going to give you. But it is my distinct pleasure to start this panel off with Kelly Oshbach, who is got most of the questions last year. So we're going to start off with you, and maybe it'll just stay there the entire hour and a half.
They pay you?
Yeah, yes, they did pay me, actually. So Kelly, as I think many of you know, is commander of the IW community, which has been rolled up. It's an amalgamation of a lot of different communities over the years. And Kelly, I guess the question to start with is everybody in here knows, and as a former Chief of Naval Personnel, it is all about people, no matter what you do. And in her case, it really is all about people. So Kelly, as you are forming this community, continuing to take it to the next level and all the challenges that are out there in cyber and space, and we can go on and on and on. That's why a lot of people asked you questions last year. What are your biggest challenges on the people front? How do you see that coming together for your community?
Let's see here. Is it not?
They're not working. There you go.
I think you're good.
Oh,
That's good.
they're on already, okay.
Yeah.
Hey, well, thank you. And I would say that, yeah, people are our weapon system in information warfare. And as I've told many audiences, and I think you heard this from me last year, our biggest challenge right now is pacing demand. We are needed everywhere, and I cannot produce enough information warfare capacity and capability to distribute it everywhere that we would like to have it. And so that remains a real pressing challenge for me on how do we prioritize where we put our talent and ensure that we have it in the most impactful place we can when we remain high demand, low density. And then the other challenge related to that is the concern I have about the quality of the training we provide. And we are pressing hard to get into live, virtual, constructive training environment because as many of you know, information warfare capabilities are typically the type of capabilities that we either don't have the authorization to fully exercise in our own airspace and waters, or frankly, if we could fully exercise them, we don't want to reveal what we're truly capable of. And so we need to be in a virtual environment where we can allow our sailors to explore the full capability and capacity that we currently deliver and that we're programmed to bring to bear in the next couple of years. As you know, if we unleash sailors in those environments, they will innovate in a way that we'll discover we have capability we didn't even know we had. And we also will be able to be more effective and efficient in how rapidly we train those folks. And the last thing I would add on that is the future is bright. I would say we have tons of talent coming into the Navy, but when we talk about retention in this recruiting environment, I also think the training piece is vital, that we give world-class training, and if we do that, folks will want to stay in our line of work.
Thanks for that. And we're going to circle back to some of those for everybody. I think those are a lot of great points on the training and retention challenges that all of you are facing. Now, for Admiral Kitchener-Roy and Jeff Jablin from the submarine community, both of you your communities are facing some real challenges in ready ships to deploy. The yards where there's a large, and especially in the public yards for you, Jeff, have a huge public workforce that's trying to get submarines out the door. On the private side, we have the same challenges for the surface Navy. And Jeff, or Roy, you've been out there here recently laying down a number that you want to achieve at 75 ready ships, mission-capable ready ships, as a baseline for the future operations that you see in the fleet. So for both of you, can you talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing in the yards, what their challenges are, and how you're trying to address them, and any technologies you think this group here might be able to help you with?
Yeah, sure, sir. So first of all, talk a little bit about, what we put out, or what I put out on the 75 mission-capable ships. And I think a little bit of, understanding what that 75 is. And so that 75, similar to the aviation community, I think is probably the best way to look at it, is it's not a ship fully combat certified. It's a ship that's capable of doing a number of missions. And the reason we picked that, and we got the number, actually, we looked at the joint staff and the directed readiness tables, and then looked at what exercises and other things we were supposed to support. And so we determined that, okay, the number is around 75. And what it allows us to do is to really understand our readiness in a better way than we ever have before with analytics. And so then we can determine, how do we raise those 75, which ones to the level of full mission capable? And there's some things where we're limited, right? And I'd say ordnance, I don't think is a surprise to anybody. To get to fully mission capable, that's a problem for us. People is another one. And at the same time, besides for allowing us to understand overall readiness, it really has focused us on where the gaps are and what we need to buy and where we need to spend our money, what systems, what parts we're missing. And then the biggest factor to get to the point here is on-time completion in the private shipyards remains a significant challenge for us and industry. There's still probably some things on the government side that we need to clean up, on some of our assessments before we go in and some of the planning. But quite frankly, and we don't measure it binary anymore. It used to be you either finished or you didn't. Now we're sort of measuring what are the days of maintenance delay. So for example, if a ship finishes 2 days late, maybe not as significant as somebody that's finishing 6 months late. And so as we try to drive down that number, what we found is within the industrial capacity on the waterfront and quite frankly the capability, there's certain things that we're just shorthanded on. The ability of and the number of pieces of equipment to flush systems, for example, the number of fully trained AITs that are capable of installing complex systems like canes. You want to increase that capacity, but at the same time, training up that new team or subcontractor to do that takes time, and we experience delays with it. And so we need to figure out what we as a Navy need to invest into industry in certain capabilities. And at the same time, I would argue that industry needs to sort of embrace some of the analytics and some of the tools that we're using in the Navy. And some are starting that journey, and others need to move a little bit faster on it. Some of our modernization is very complex, but at the same time, we've been, overhauling DDGs since I've been in the Navy. And there's a tried and true way to do it, and we just have to be smart on how we integrate the modernization. But it's a significant impact for us.
Thanks. Jeff?
Yes, sir. Thanks for asking that question. And I think everybody in the audience knows the challenges that we face in the submarine force for Virginia-class new construction build rate and our depot maintenance availability completion on time. We've got some idle submarines waiting to go into depot maintenance availabilities. And, that's an issue for me because that affects my ASABO. I currently have 48 fast attack submarines in the Navy. 20 of them are in the shipyard undergoing some kind of maintenance availability. So on-time completion is very important. As an operational commander, as CTF 34, I need more operational submarines, and that affects it. But I tell you, NAVSEA is taking deliberate action to improve the situation in the shipyards, and this is being led by PEO SSN Rear Admiral John Rucker. He's got several initiatives that he's going after to improve our on-time delivery of our submarines in the shipyard. One of the things he's doing is he's increasing funding to ensure that we have at least 90 to 95% of the parts bought before the availability starts. Presently, our model is 45 to 50% of the parts bought before the availability starts, and that inherently leads into delays in the shipyard. So that will improve our ability to get those ships out on time. The other thing that we've done is we've adjusted the 15-year maintenance plan to ensure that it's balanced for capability and workload across the shipyards. Also, for Virginia class, the supplier base has really shrunk over the last several years, so that supplier ability to get those parts for Virginia-class maintenance is not there. So he's out increasing the supplier base to ensure that we have the parts ready to go. The other thing that they're working on is shipyard infrastructure, the SIOP plan, which will help us improve the ability for capability and capacity, and also improving retention and hiring of shipyard workers. So I think those initiatives are helping the submarine force in the next few years to get us where we need to be for that ASUBO.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Jeff. Keith, your community is arguably the most, and I know Carson would take issue with this, but your community is probably the most combat-ready, trained force in the world today, in many respects. But your community is going through a fundamental shift back to the maritime, and you're leading that effort with 20 years of sailors out there who not only support your community, but are fighting for your community and the country. How's that going?
Hey, sir, thanks for that. And thanks to the panel. I'm honored and humbled to be a part of the team here. I think this is representative of your naval commandos coming back to the fleet. So thank you. Thanks for the very kind words. I think we have, we've got over 20 years of sustained combat operations experience. I think General Smith previously made the comment that sometimes we focus on the last war and not the next one. And I completely agree with him, but I would parry with, I think a lot of what our formations have learned in the last war will be relevant. We just have to think in different contexts. But I think so much of what we learned, combined arms maneuver, working as a joint force, right? Integrated fires, fusing operations and intelligence, all those things have application in future. It's the ways and means might change, but I think the principles. We've spent a couple decades refining things like finding, fixing, finishing, exploiting, analyzing. In manhunting context, I think in the future, we'll probably look at, identifying and maybe going after systems and not people as much. But I say that to tell you, sir, that I think we have a lot to offer the Joint Force. I also think the SOF has gotten pretty good. Your Special Operations Forces have gotten pretty good working across geographic combatant command boundaries and with the Joint Force, because SOF is joint by nature, but also our interagency partners. And I think going forward and the threats that this nation faces, I think we've got to actually do that on steroids. I think it's not just law enforcement intelligence, but it's a lot of other elements of national power. How's the transition going? I think well. There's elements, I think, in the community that have a lot of identity tied up in counterterrorism and violent extremism. But a couple thoughts on that. One, we're still in the counterterrorism business. We have to make sure there's not a 9/11, I think. Also, because we've had all this combat experience, it turns out that a lot of partners and allies want to partner with us. And that presents opportunities to strengthen partnerships globally. But what I'm seeing is, and where we're investing a lot of energy and money, is in those exquisite maritime platforms that give us, I think, unique access and placement. That I think will set the conditions so that we can be better mission partners to everyone on this stage.
Yeah, great. And Karsten, naturally, a lot of what Keith just talked about, the Commandant has been directing for the last 4 years, and you're kind of central to the execution of that in your current role. change of that magnitude is not insignificant. So how are you managing that change? Where are your challenges? Where are the resistance to it from within in the Marine Corps that you're comfortable talking about, but maybe for the benefit of everybody here, when change like this happens, how do you as a leader really focus on getting everybody on board?
Well, sir, thanks for the question. And yet, so for doing this now for about 17 months and being at the whirlwind of all things force design, and it's a heavy lift. But as you heard, for those that listened to the ACMAC talk this morning, Marines are, one thing we pride ourselves on is doing what we're told to do, provided it's a lawful order. 2 national defense strategies across 2 different administrations directed us to focus on China. It was acknowledged by then Commandant Dunford that the Marine Corps was not organized, trained, or equipped to deal with the pacing threat. And I think over the years, that was in 2017-ish, 16-ish. I mean, in the intervening years since, the CCP has done nothing but advance. And I think just on that, I'm action-packed with issues and pet peeves. One of them is calling them the PRC. There's nothing Republican about the Chinese Communist Party. They're a bunch of communists. So we need to start addressing, and words matter. When you control vernacular and language, you control thought. And until we acknowledge what they are, it's not, and as we heard the ACMAC say in one of his speeches or presentations, we don't have any issue with the Chinese people. It's with the CCP. But they've accelerated, right? So my biggest issue, sir, is there's the resistance you're hearing. Pick your flavor, which one. The most vocal, it's really insignificant, quite frankly, to be honest with you. I interact with a lot of Marines, active and former, retired, so I don't really spend any time on that. The big lift, sir, is speed and pace, and it really has been kind of alluded to here by the other panel members, and a lot of that, for me, revolves around the industrial base. We've seen, and then I heard a congressperson on TV talking about we should stop sending stuff to Ukraine and stockpile it for the CCP. With all due respect, you're missing the message. You're missing the lesson. We do not, if we have exhausted our munitions depth in a fight with the Ukrainians fighting with the Russians, imagine what's going to happen when we fight the CCP. So you missed the message. So the industrial base, and I would say acceleration and moving out faster. We're doing everything we can. We've been given some authorities where we can, but there's still some ways, some policies, some things, I'm dealing with one right now that's just straight policy, right? Bad policy, who cares? Ignore it. Orders and directives, a different thing, and I'll never break the law. But bad policy that's inhibiting us getting after what the National Defense Strategy has told us to get after is a problem. So I would say, sir, industrial base across the board, particularly my focus as the crisis response force is amphibs, huge. I'm about to make my 4th trip down to the Gulf Coast week after next. To let them know make sure they know that they've got that I'm listening. But we need to, I think the industrial base going forward and having stability is going to be a big piece, and then just speeding up. They're all kind of tied in. I don't know if that got after it, but.
Yeah, great. Air Boss, naval aviation back in 2017, 2018 timeframe was really challenged with the readiness of the fleet. And your predecessor sitting here with his head down doesn't want to look up at me right now, but your predecessor and you guys have kind of led the way on readiness recovery of platforms, and by extension, the force. But it all has only focused on Super Hornet readiness for the large part from a public standpoint. I think it'd be great if you could give an update on what the rest of the force is doing along the same lines and how you're managing through that.
Yeah, so to let Bullet out of the, let him out of jail a little bit. He started the Super Hornet side of the house, which allowed us to move into other platforms. So as of a couple weeks ago, every single platform across the Navy is now moved into the Maintenance Operations Center, which is one of the 7 pillars of the Naval Sustainment Strategy. Aviation performed a plan, which was the precursor to Get Real, Get Better right now. So the big thing is Bullet was going for the 341 numbers based on, as Keith, my earlier folks talked about, what's needed for the warfighting side of the house. And then taking advantage of what Keith said is we truly are focused on the next battle. We aren't looking for the victories that we had in the last fights that we had. Part of that, as you've alluded to, is the readiness and the availability of every single one of the platforms that we have in naval aviation. So the numbers have been upgraded on the platforms that we need in the most stressing scenarios that we're going to have on what have been provided for us from the Joint Staff as well as from CNO's guidance there. So we moved beyond Super Hornet. In fact, we pushed the numbers up from a little bit smaller number that Bullet had. Now we're at a higher number based on what the demand signal has. The same thing has occurred across the JSF numbers as we build those numbers up. Growler capability, G model, E2Ds. Every single platform in naval aviation has a mission capability number that we need to fight. What has changed from last year as we embarked on mission capability is now how are we going to truly fight the high-end fight from an availability perspective. And now we've moved into full mission capability. So the platforms that we need to be able to perform at the way you guys, the contract and industry base, design those based on our specifications. Now we're moving into full mission capability, and those numbers have been established for us now. Just like we did with mission capability, we understood what systems weren't working according to spec. We understood the price to maintain those systems. We understood where the availability was in the supply line so that we could keep the ecosystem going. That same concept has been translated into full mission capability as we prepare for the next event here. So I'm pretty proud that we've moved beyond the next level. This is where industry's got to step in. The reliability boards, the work with Pete Stamatopoulos at NAV Supply, the analysis that we are doing through our analytics group, data analytics that we're providing are not subjective. They're not just something thrown up against a wall. We have the data to prove based on what we need for mission capable as well as full mission capable systems. This is what we've done in-house. I need industry to be able to step forward and give us those systems so that we can build upon the reliability in the systems, to be able to measure how our systems are performing so that when and if, I guess when the system, the balloon goes up, we're going to be able to perform with the systems that we have right now. MC, we're on a great path in naval aviation. Full mission capability is going to be our fight through the 23 and into the 24 time frame. Using the exact same methodology that we did for MC, I think we're going to come to a full mission capability side of the house. Training side, as Kelly alluded to, you know, the folks are our most important piece. Fallon's done phenomenal work in the integrated training facility. Sinatra with Snap Brophy's done phenomenal with moving into the virtual reality and mixed reality with the integrated training facility. We still have the CSG training facility that we've trained with our Aegis partners up in Fallon. We're moving I-4 into train with us there. That is the next generation for us, is to move fully into live virtual constructive, move fully into mixed reality, virtual reality side of the house, specifically for our sailors. The officer side, the aircraft side, we're moving down the right path. But for our sailors, that's where we need to move. Ready, relevant learning has not delivered significantly for naval aviation. We just did a summit 2 weeks ago to support NETSI and NOC WD to be able to support them in moving the football down the field. We have deployed twice now with the first instantiation of Air Wing of the Future. JSF, E2D, CMV-22, upgraded growlers. Our sailors need to be able to work on those systems when they're at sea, not calling back for some forceful backup. So what have we done up to then? On Abraham Lincoln, the mixed reality training system is already on Abraham Lincoln for the blue shirts to understand how to taxi aircraft around. There's a mixed reality training system that Pete Garvin's employing down in Pensacola, Florida. Again, as we expand that across the rates, brick and mortar is here until it deteriorates. We're moving away from that. It's glasses, mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality. Flying-wise, we've already been doing it for 2 years with Snap Brophy down and with the T6, with the Project Avenger. The augmented reality that we're flying, you go into the hangar down there and all the students are wearing goggles and they're flying phenomenal systems. They're better trained, They're graduating sooner, and the return on investment down in Sinatra is coming back because of where we're going into augmented and mixed reality. That's where industry needs to go for training for naval aviation.
Great, thanks for that update. A lot going on there. Carson, you and Roy both have a warm spot in your hearts for amphibs. And I'm glad there's two people sitting in between you, because I don't want this to become a fight over this. But talk to us a little bit about, Roy, you set the hammer down at 75. I don't think that includes amphibs, or does it?
No, it does, absolutely does.
It does,
Yeah.
okay.
The only
How many
ships-
of that 75 are amphibs?
Right now, I would say, so if you break it down, you can break it down by class. For example, you'd look at a threshold of, I need to have X amount of amphibs, and then this many would be ready, and then we work on it. So the only ships not included in the 75 are the 2 command ships, the ESBs, and the 3 DDG-1000s.
Okay. So as you guys obviously talk about this, Force Design 2030, the numbers that the commandants put out, the numbers that seem to be agreeable between the two service chiefs, but you guys at the tactical level here, how are you working through availabilities to meet his training demands in the Marine Corps and your own training demands in the Navy?
I think right now, I mean, we're challenged. We're challenged to, take, for example, LHD, old steam powered plant. We're challenged in the parts. For example, we were working on a forced draft blower component on USS Boxer. Not only did we not have the part, but we had to actually, do kind of a worldwide search to find the material to make the parts. And that took, an industry and Navy-wide effort. And so, that's just sort of a microcosm of sort of what we're faced with. You look at aging ships, LSDs, which, we have a few that we think we can continue to run these ships into the future. And then we have a number that we feel that we need to decommission them because we're, quite frankly, they're not going to meet the readiness requirement. And so it's something that we talk with the Marine Corps. As a matter of fact, right now, we're working through a readiness review of the amphibs. And not only just the material readiness, we're looking at leadership, we're looking at training, technical proficiency, for example, on steam plants. Admiral Jim Kirk's kind of running that for us at ESG-3. We've got PP&O reps involved with that. And we've got the Marine Corps training reps helping us out, MAR4 packs involved. And we're trying to figure out, okay, what levers can we pull to make a difference so that we can get these ships, out on time and ready to go. But we are not going to send something forward that's not ready. And I think we're both committed to meeting the requirements. And it's a matter of what do we want to build and what do we want to decommission and what do we have ready to send forward. So I think it's a constructive relationship. I mean, there's friction. I mean, we talk about that all the time. But it's not like we're pointing at each other. We sort of got to figure it out so we can meet the demand. But it is a challenge for us right now, and we continue to work through it. And over to Carson for his.
No, I mean, Roy and I go way back. We just realized that we were in the deployment back in 1994 together with the George Washington's maiden voyage. But I'll just stand. I have all the faith in the world with all my shipmates up here that people are doing the right thing. That's not the issue, right? I know that. And we understand, as ACMAC alluded to, that the Navy is really pressurized by Columbia, and it's a fight for resources. And it, as Mike Howell taught me a long time ago, it's not just all about the money, it's all about the money and resourcing, right? So it's a big issue. What I will simply stand on is, as the requirements officer for the Marine Corps, is stand on the requirement of the Commandant wants a 2.0 MU presence. Now, in years past, when I grew up, it was a 3.0. When a MU left the Mediterranean through the Strait of Gibraltar, a MU came through. We were always on station, right? 3.0. I think as the world becomes more unpredictable, as the CCB's malign behavior and conventional aggression in the last few days notwithstanding, as those things continue with what we're seeing with Russia, the world is going to become a more unpredictable and dangerous place. Things like amphibs are going to be, and I just want to highlight that what was out there recovering the balloon, Carter Hall, and I think the Navy contracted an offshore supply vessel to go help pick it up, which we're using as an interim solution to the medium landing ship, the artist formerly known as Law. And that went into the water yesterday. The ACMAC alluded to up to 3. We have an option for up to 3. So, but with that requirement of the MU presence forward is the requirement to train. We all know that, right? I'm a helicopter guy and a tilt rotor guy. Grew up on the back of amphibs in the Med. The ACMAX example of landing on a pitching and rolling deck at the middle of the night with goggles on, that's real, right? And I felt my whole career growing up that I was super comfortable. I could have done it anywhere, anytime. We need to make sure that is the standard that we're shooting after. Same with wet well ops or anything else. All of that is an inherently risky business, and the more reps and sets we can get, the better off, and it's going to be a direct correlation of the readiness of the fleet.
Yeah, great, thanks. Kelly, the latest NDAA challenged all of the cyber forces across the joint force, to include, obviously, the Navy, about building out the cyber mission or force generation, which is a density problem for you, right? Not enough people, perhaps, to do everything that involves a cyber mission team, as well as training, education, all the other challenges you have as a TICOM. What do you think about this, and what are your asks of not only this audience, but I mean, you kind of addressed it earlier in terms of being able to do more with technology to train and educate so you can keep the people doing the mission. What are some other ideas you have along those lines? And I'd ask everybody else on the panel to think about that, because I'll just circle back with you on the challenges with the density of people that you have. Can you do all that you want to do with the numbers that are allocated today?
I guess I would offer on the cyber mission force and the NDAA language. Navy was already on a path and had already identified that we had made some poor decisions relative to the cyber mission force, and that really we had not put in place the processes to effectively train the individuals who serve on the cyber mission force. And so we have a whole plan in motion right now where we are lifting and shifting all training to the left so that our cyber operators and everyone who fills the 15 different work roles across the cyber mission force teams actually shows up fully trained, because we actually weren't doing that. We had rushed to put everybody on the field when the call was there to field a cyber mission force, but we had not put in place the proper process to ensure the right individuals with the right skills are showing up. And so we're doing that. And so we certainly welcome the congressional advocacy we've received, and some pretty specific direction, but we were already on a path to do specialization in cyber within our designators. And so the establishment of a designator is a path that we will achieve and will probably make us more effective in the cyber capability we're already delivering. And we already had a world-class sailor in the Cryptologic Technician Network series that was doing cyber operations. And so we will transition that into a more clearly named and designated cyber rating. Possibly cyber warfare technician is what we're talking about, but we'll have our own family series focused on cyber and delivery capability. Where we could use help on the training piece, as the Air Boss alluded to, we are rapidly moving away from brick and mortar being effective for us. And so where we're really focused in cyber right now is the persistent cyber training environment. How do we come up with an architecture that allows our sailors and our officers to operate in environments that they will encounter when they're actually on the net? And how do we distribute that to a disaggregated force that's located globally so they can train on location and keep their proficiency high? We're on that path with PCTE, but the more we can deliver environments like that and architecture like that, I think is really key for us. I also think that industry needs to be focused on how do we deliver software solutions, not hardware solutions, that we are moving to a place where we have the agility and the architecture to actually upgrade software or ingest new software capabilities. And I think it's really important that we're thinking about that and that we move away from having to be wedded, particularly for our ships, to maintenance yard periods, to actually get installations done, and that we have the ability on demand via architecture to integrate the best that industry has to offer. And we've got a number of pilots ongoing with that I think are demonstrating some tremendous viability. Hopefully we're going to be able to scale some of that. But I think those are the kind of tools that would really help the cyber mission force.
Great, thank you. Anybody else at the panel want to add on top of what Kelly just said about the focus on the technical side, but also if you've got any thoughts on the density or the lack thereof to enable you to move the force around to get the training and the education you need, that is also coming under the new concept of training on ready, relevant learning, the idea is to do the right training at the right time, the right place, not all up front. So thoughts on that, anybody?
Just a couple of thoughts is that, you know, we've heavily invested in virtual training, and actually we're coming up to a point where we're reinvesting in the upgrades. I think one of the challenges we see in one area particularly, and Kelly sort of alluded to this, when we do major software upgrades on our Aegis combat system or SSDS combat system on our ships, we're always trying to solve, you know, the future problem. And sometimes what we're doing is we're taking on a little bit too much, and maybe we just need something a little less complex to deploy while we're working this system. But along with those changes comes along with a training tail. And we haven't done as well closing that gap as we would like. I think some of the trainers that are coming out, we have these VOTs, these virtual trainers that we're putting in each fleet concentration area. And what we found with those is that's an ability where we can actually load this new software load onto it and help us catch up with that training. So we're looking at that heavily to close the gap. And then the other one is, as we delve more into the human factor side of things and human performance, I think as we look to trainers, they need to be able to give us not only, you know, a good simulation so our sailors and officers can practice, but at the same time, they need to be able to port that information off to us so that we can capture the human performance stuff and put that into the databases that we're using. I think that's something I've engaged industry on. They're working on it. But I think there are strides across the Navy, but particularly in our community with LVC and other things have fundamentally changed the way we do it. I mean, it is our ability to train a ship in the basic phase now through ATG is just using those systems is game changing.
Great. Anybody else?
I was just going to pile on to the point that that I do think the training aspect that the SWOBOS is referring to in terms of we underestimate that every time. And when we talk about wholeness and readiness, we actually do a really good job sometimes delivering capability, accelerating installation, fielding it, but we often seem to forget, especially with technology now, the complexity of what we're talking about and how we turn sailors into self-sustaining operators and maintainers and allow them to be self-sufficient once they've got that capability integrated.
Great. All right, I'm going to turn to the audience now, and folks can start lining up at the mics, and we'll get around to you here. I would remind everybody here, as TICOMs, this group is very much got one foot in today and another foot in tomorrow, in the future, and are oftentimes consumed with the today part of this thing. So to the degree that you ask the questions that are focused more on the future, to let them give you some insight on what they see their reliefs and their relief might need to be a better force, that would be helpful. Yes, ma'am, go ahead. And if you would, just let us know who you are, where you're from, and ask the question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Sally Kenyon Grant with Dark Trace. We are machine learning warfare, and thank you, Admiral Moran, for your comments regarding the human performance. However, I'd like to address the Admiral Kelly's important points regarding cyber mission force for machine learning warfare, machine-on-machine combat, augmenting the human team with unsupervised machine learning, where the machines are making those decisions, supporting the human element. And to the group, sir, the plans to move forward with no FTEs, no additional labor hours, but increasing machine-on-machine attack surface. Thank you.
All right, Kelly, you were called out on that one. You want to jump on it first?
Yeah, I'll jump on that grenade. So I would offer that we are looking at some integration and how we integrate more autonomy and machine learning support for our force, particularly to free our intellectual capacity to focus on what's most important. But I would say there's a lot of challenges there, and the biggest one is trust, and then us being smart enough to understand the algorithms that are making the recommendations so we can build that trust. And so I think we've got work to do on that. I also think that when we talk about autonomy and how we're also trying to employ things like unmanned, where we want vehicles to go off and perform missions for us, We also underestimate that we still need men and women in the loop if we want the vehicles back. We also need a much more exquisite understanding of the battle space they're operating in, so it pressurizes us in a different way. It gives us a different relationship with how we work with our technology. And I think if we get it right, I actually think we're a little unprepared for the sophistication with which we'll need to train our sailors, because we will move them out of the more mundane tasks and free them to bring a greater capacity to bear. So we have some of that going on. I would say the delivery of the MLAI piece has, I think for everyone, has just not been as satisfying as we would like it to be. And I feel like I'm still waiting for some scale there, that we have some great examples, but we haven't been able to employ it yet in a way that we're really realizing, I think, the machine-man pairing that you read about, and I'm not really sure that's us getting in our way. I really do think that's finding the technology that we can effectively scale in terms of having the kind of impact or outcome we're looking for.
It seems like we're learning a lot, the Navy's learning a lot from Task Force 59 and the work that's going on the unmanned front. And there is a lot of manned-unmanned teaming concepts being developed. And each one of you in all of your communities are dealing with that right now, some a little more advanced than others. Keith, I think you guys have been doing some of this in ways that most of us don't even know about. And you have some lessons learned, some comments, maybe some instruction for us on how to think about it in the future.
Okay. Hey, sir. Yeah, I would, I don't know if this gets to the question exactly. My experience with using algorithms has actually been not maybe what a lot of us think about, using drones and all that. Really, where I've seen it most powerful to date has actually been in support of like intelligence. So we are flooded with information now. It used to be we were data starved. Now we're data rich, but it's too much and we can't process and exploit and disseminate it. And where I've seen really good success, really good return, is where we have humans, intelligence specialists, identifying maybe behavioral patterns and that sort of thing. And then programmers are writing algorithms that are going through mountains of data, and they're flagging adversarial behaviors that we're not even looking for. Yes, ma'am.
This is not. Actually, sir, what we're talking about is no programming. Those machines are making those decisions to help the augmentation. Thank you.
And that goes to the whole trust comment that Admiral Oshbach brought in. Jeff, you're doing some interesting work in the unmanned world, or at least the acquisition community that supports you is doing that work. What are you seeing and learning from that?
Yeah, so for those of you that don't know, we recently stood up a Major Command UUV-RON 1, Unmanned Undersea Vehicle Squadron 1, which reports to me directly as a TICOM, as a type commander, and we stood that up in Bangor, Washington. So that Commodore is in charge of all UUV and unmanned operations for the submarine force. One of the things that we are focusing on is subsea seabed warfare, which would bring great capability to attack that capacity with unmanned vehicles, and also bringing fires against those targets. So that's really a growth industry that we're working at right now. We're also working on torpedo tube launch and recovery of UUVs, and very successful in that area. So working out on a couple of those areas within the submarine force.
Great. And Roy, what would you say is driving what here? Is strategy for unmanned driving technology, or is technology driving the strategy? In other words, the CONOPS to employ them?
I think it's a little bit of both, but I mean, for us, obviously the Task Force 59 work, where we do a lot of the RMP stuff at an unclassified level with the allies in the Gulf, which has been very successful. As a matter of fact, we're starting up an early command opportunity for JOs, one with Task Force 59 and then one out with our division up in Ventura for the medium-sized USVs we employ here. And then I think on the West Coast here, we don't talk as much about some of our unmanned, because some of the mission packages that we're working with, are being designed for a very specific threat to address. And so I think as we advance along, where, a lot of our effort went into autonomy, right? How long can this, and endurance, how long can this system last? Is it compliant with call regs? And we got to a certain point, and then we started to say, okay, we're at a we're going to continue this work, but we're at a good point. What can we actually use these things for? How do they fit into the design that were the warfighting design in the Pacific? And done a lot of work with the Marine Corps on this, on some integrated fire stuff, and then some stuff we just can't talk about. And so I think it's, you know, initially that drive was to, okay, let's get a bus to do it. And now these mission packages that industry's showing us and some things we've asked them to do and what they've delivered, that has really expanded our ability to look at the ConOps and say, hey, we could use this here. We'll get the bus to a certain point, and then we'll get it out there. So it's been kind of exciting, actually.
Yeah. And Kenny, you in the Air Wing of the Future, there's a lot of this component baked in. What are you seeing now that is giving you hope that Air Wing of the Future can take advantage of this?
Well, I think, you know, we're in the crawl, walk, run phase where we're beyond a little bit of the crawl because of we've already transitioned out of MQ-8 Bravo into MQ-8 Charlie. We've EOC'd Triton. IFC-4 for Triton is in test right now in Mayport, and will deploy to the Western Pacific here in the fall of this year. And now as we're working with Boeing Corporation for MQ-25 to be able to deliver that, that'll be the first instantiation with our stated IOC date, and we have a carrier for a stated deploy date for MQ-25. The lessons that we've learned off of those three platforms will be molded back in to the next generation air dominance family of systems and how we then employ manned-unmanned teaming. Roy's comment or his answer that it's a little bit of both the technology and strategy. We know what we need to do to defeat the threat. As technology catches up to that strategy piece, that's where the nirvana piece will be there. The ability to take some platforms early, test what we need to do in the future, go back to industry on how fast and faster we need to move and how we need to distribute some of that decision-making, that human decision-making, back to other platforms, both deployed as well as ashore. We're working through that decision driver tree right now. Again, the next big leap for us will be NGAD family of systems.
Yeah, go ahead, Keith.
Hey, sir, I'd just like to riff off because I do want to talk real briefly about the unmanned systems because I think Naval Special Warfare has now tens of thousands of hours actually flying unmanned systems in combat. Now, they're small systems, but really we say unmanned, there's a lot of people in the loop, right? It's a dozen people depending on the system flying one. Last summer, we were actually able to get to the point where we've got one person flying 7 systems. So we're on a journey, but the machines are doing a lot more. I'm not actually piloting. I'm giving them broad directions, and then they're providing overwatch, where some drones were flying into a target building and others are surrounding it. So you're starting to, where I need help from industry and what I'm struggling with is, I'm kind of fighting using precision to overcome mass, and I think this unmanned systems is one of the ways I think that will help us get there.
Yeah. Carson, you obviously your role, you've got a lot of innovation going on this front. Anything you want to add?
No, I mean, I would just say the one thing that implicit to the discussion, particularly on AI and ML, is robotics. Seems to be emerging for me as an area that shows real potential. I think on a lot of the decisions we're talking about, or where there's going to be a decision point, is going to be the ethical decision about unmanned killing human beings without somebody in the loop, which if it's the right people that need killing, we're all for. So, let them go do it. But we're learning a lot on that. And I will say, unmanned for us, everything. Unmanned, one way we're looking at very heavily is unmanned logistics. The reason in JADF South that the drug lords use submersible vehicles is because it works, right? I don't know what the data point is about how many we actually find, but we're exploring some of that area as well.
Great. All right, thanks for your patience. You are up next, ma'am. Go ahead.
Hi, Mallory Shelbourne with US 9 News. I have a two-part question for General Heckel about amphibs. Following up on some of what the ACMAC said this morning, for 35 landing ship mediums, I think he said it was 9 ships per MLR. Can you just talk about how you arrived at that requirement and elaborate on that? And then the other piece of my question is the ACMAC did say that the Navy and the Marine Corps both see 31 amphibs as the requirement, and 35 is the requirement for the Marine Corps' LSMs. but the CNO's plan still says 18 LSM, so I'm wondering if you could just talk about the difference there.
Sure, Mallory, good to see you. So, and when I saw you step up, I knew it was going to hurt. So, so on the medium landing ship LSM, I know it doesn't make any sense. Neither does TEPF. And I'm trying to be in strict compliance with the 30-year shipbuilding plan. So LSM, medium landing ship, the artist formerly known as Law. They, before I got to CD&I, they had done modeling and simulation with, I have an operations analysis directorate. They had done extensive modeling and simulation on what it requires to support a regiment. Doesn't necessarily need to be a Marine littoral regiment, just a regiment. So the square footage, the cargo, and that's where we came up with the requirements. Berthing, fuel, all of it, right? So, and we've been working very closely with Mr. Stephanie and ASNRDA and my team up here particularly with Satan Khan. So on the question you asked about how many, if you look at the language, me and Satan crafted that, and it says 18 is the initial. The first sentence says 35 is the requirement. The initial operational inventory will be 18. I think I got that right. So I'm kind of doing it off the cuff. But I guess the larger point, Mallory, is that this has been a very close collaboration with me and the OpNav staff and my team, and so I think we're moving in the right direction. Did I get that?
Yeah, and if you could just elaborate on the 9 ships per MLR,
Yeah,
how
so-
that kind of came to be.
So Marine Corps has been maneuvering and using regiments as a part of the MAGTAF for quite a while. We know what it is required to support a regiment. Again, whether it's an MLR or any other variation of the MAGTAF, that's the strength of the Marine Corps, right? We've always been a MAGTAF, still are. The MLR is simply another flavor of a Marine Air Ground Task Force. So we have data that we've used for, when we've been taking RCTs forward, the footage that's required to support a regiment, and particularly in the amphibious environment. So it's all that data exists, and it drove the requirements. And again, it's primarily centers around tonnage and square footage of cargo and things, right? So, and again, to the point that that made, I just want to highlight this. One of the things going into force design that was a limiting factor from the beginning when we started this journey, that we be organically movable, right, and maneuverable. And we are. Gator, HIMARS, all KC-130J. There will be some things that will require surface lift. It's simply, and the real strength in that thing is it has to be a shore-to-shore. The days of offloading an Iron Mountain in Kuwait or in Saudi Arabia in preparation for the breach, I don't think are going to be happening anymore, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. So the Marines will not be pier dependent. We're not going to be a big 12,000-foot runway dependent. We need shore-to-shore maneuver, and that's what the LSM brings.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mallory.
Okay, let's move over here. Yes, sir.
Hi, thank you, Admiral, for this panel. Great discussion. John Klein from Johnson Controls. Are there ways that a shore facility readiness data, when networked, could support y'all in a high-end fight, and how can industry help?
Yeah, we don't really have well, go ahead. Roy, you want to lurch into that
I
one?
would say the data that I look at for the shore infrastructure to support us is pretty broad, but areas that we've been looking at significantly lately is at our weapon stations. How fast can we unload ordnance, right? Traditionally, we have just, in peacetime, we've said, okay, DDGX, go up there, it takes you, this many days, and it's not good enough, right? So we've been working hard on experimenting and saying, all right, let's see how fast we can do it. What does it take? What are the limitations? And so as we tie all these things together and looking at the data on, what does each facility have to support us, that's very helpful because we're finding gaps, in yellow gear. We're finding gaps in certified people to do some of these support functions that are critical to sustaining our operations and allowing us, or probably hindering us in our ability to move with more urgency and effectiveness. So I think there's things like that we can use, and then you could also delve into some of the human stuff as well. But that's an area where I'm pretty focused now, is what's available and where are the gaps in it, so we can advocate along with the shore infrastructure partners and everyone else, so we can resource those things to enable us to get to the fight quicker.
I think there's broad application in information warfare because almost everything we do comes from an operational shore command. And we actually still wrestle with how do we characterize readiness for all of the capability we deliver from our operational shore sites 24/7. The Cyber Mission Force is an example where I think we're wrestling with, how do you characterize readiness? And I've had the dialogue with Cyber Command that for all the focus we put on the training pillar and the equipment pillar, they actually don't have a pillar for the infrastructure, literally the seats and the hardware that are required to do the job. And that's a factor from a shore perspective. But we're very facility dependent in information warfare. Our platforms are our buildings. And how we characterize that, how we develop a system of systems models, because every building we have is different. They're not identical like ships are, and so how we come up with a way to characterize that and make comparisons relative and be predictive about readiness. We've been working on that, so certainly efforts in that area I think could be helpful for us in characterizing what's required and where we're at risk in that support.
Okay, thanks. Yes, sir.
Kai Albert, Washington State. Since we're looking at the future, I'd like the panel to comment on what you see in the future for energy weapons, such as lasers. And as you comment on that, also the required energy sources as we're looking for increased capability weapons with increased energy output, sources on sea, air, and land platforms.
I'll just start off quickly. Gerald R. Ford getting ready to go on her second deployment with EMALS, and as we move away from steam power, the extra generation for electricity, I'm watching what Roy's doing and Admiral Selby's doing for the directed energy piece. Obviously, the common sense piece is if I don't have to load the weapons bays, but I can use reconstitutable, always available directed energy. It plays on my sustainability piece, and it plays on the lethality piece. I'm not sure how far technology is developed and where our risks are right now in deploying and fielding the directed energy side. It's an area for the next conflict that needs to move out at a faster pace than it's going now. Kennedy looks like a ship. Ford's already a ship. Dory Miller is setting there, and then pulling some of that directed energy on board some of our platforms. What NJAD's going to look like? Again, it would be nirvana to not be restricted by the number of weapons rails on a platform, internal and external, and to have directed energy. It doesn't have to kill, but it can put an enemy to a point where it is no longer offensively or defensively capable in the air.
Yeah, from the surface perspective, we remain very interested in it. If you look at we had Portland deployed with one. We have LCS we want to deploy with a system. We're finishing up Preble, who's just getting underway now, and she's actually got a laser system integrated into her combat system, which is kind of a first for us. And so the idea of a bottomless magazine or an application, whether it's air defense, BMD, or anti-surface, remains very attractive to us. I think some of the things we've learned, just to sort of feed back some information, is we're doing a lot of experimentation. I think we need to kind of look hard at what it takes to sustain these systems at sea. It's a challenging environment, as we all know, for normal things, and lasers add another level of complexity to that. So as we kind of work through it, and we've had some pretty good success, one of the areas I'm concerned about is, all right, got it, it works, it's got a great capability, how do we sustain it in this environment, and what do we need to do to sustain it? So that's an area I think that industry needs to continue to look at, but yeah, bottomless magazine remains extremely attractive to us for a number of applications.
I would just echo what the Air Boss said, though, about electromagnetic maneuver warfare and the impact now because of how we're employing so many different capabilities and what that means for our ability to maneuver across the spectrum. We are learning some things in terms of how that impacts our own capabilities, and we also got to think about how we're effective in applying that across that space. We partner closely with everybody else on the operational concepts we're developing and the role the information warfare commander can play and how we deliver things like directed energy and the total effects that we bring to bear. And we're also working hard in deepening our training in that area because that is, with other stuff that's coming, I think we have capability on the non-kinetic to kinetic range that could be really impactful in the next couple of years, but we don't have a lot of practice yet with it, and so we continue to work with everybody on how we do that.
Okay, yes, sir, go ahead.
Yeah, Paul Rosbolt from Systems Planning and Analysis. I noticed you don't have an N4 representative up here, but one of the things that most of you rely upon for readiness is your afloat logistics force. And so I just asked any on the panel to comment on where they think afloat logistics needs to go and how they're doing right now. We've kind of outsourced that to MSC, and it's a critical component.
Well, in force design right now, if you don't know, we put out an annual report every year on force design, and I'm working on the current one right now for the Commandant to release later this year. But our pacing effort right now within force design is logistics. We conducted a globally positioned network, GPN, integrated planning team conducted down for about 2 weeks, pulled in SMEs from all over the fleet to include the Navy to get after that, and put one of my brightest and hardest working colonels in charge of it, and it's really proven out a lot of good facts. The other part, we just completed the Enterprise Logistics IPT2, and we're moving out on that as well. At the end of the day, and you heard the ATMAC allude to that one of the things, expeditionary contracting, there's a lot of things forward that you can, we learned that in Afghanistan and Iraq. There's a lot of things you can contract forward that you don't need to rely on a sustainment system. To some point, we are focusing on lethality, right? And the sustainment of lethality. In other words, increasing the magazine depth. We all know that's an issue. I alluded to it in an earlier answer, but it's going to be a problem. But we're looking at other things, like for instance, within my purview is the Marine Corps Warfighting Lab. The CG there, the commanding general there, is also the vice ONR for Admiral for Admiral Selby. So we're but simple things like Mark 80 pick your series, and being able to adapt a kit to that so it can go longer range. Again, provides diversity and depth, other high-end systems. So I know I'm not really answering your question. I will simply tell you that from the Marine Corps perspective, logistics right now is what we are more sighted on. We realize it's probably the Achilles heel, and we're looking at it across the portfolio.
Yep. So for logistics in the submarine force, my main concern is expeditionary logistics and rearm, reload, resupply during wartime. So I think most of you know we've got 2 tenders that are in Guam right now, the Frank Cable and the Emery-S Land, and those are capable ships, but they're old, over 50 years old, and we're looking to extend them out to about the 2030, 2031 timeframe. Looking at ASX right now, designing the next tender. But what we're using those tenders for, one tender remains the lead maintenance activity in Guam, and the other tender, when they're not the lead maintenance activity, is doing expeditionary logistics. For example, we had Frank Cable go down to Australia and rearm, resupply USS Mississippi, doing a training event, and we need to do more of that and get that capability there. So that's our focus right now for expeditionary logistics in wartime, to ensure we're able to rearm and resupply those submarines during combat.
I think just a couple of examples, a little bit at the strategic level and then maybe down to the operational tactical level is, we stood up Task Force 504, which is now a warfighting hat that I have on logistics and sustainment. So I think that was significant, but what's even more significant is that, Comlog Westpac, who traditionally runs all of that in the Western Pacific Force, now they're doing that. So we are creating a design that we won't just turn the switch come war. We're going to operate like that all the time. And I think VLS reloads, we talked about that already. We've done a lot of work on that. I think the way we're working and some of our classes of ships, particularly DDG 1000 and LCS, is all based on an expeditionary concept on where we can move things and how we can move it around. And then all our war games now, logistics is a significant part of it, and where in the past we did not. And so we're really trying to understand the gaps, and MSC under Admiral Wetloff has done a phenomenal job in figuring out what it takes to keep that force moving and how we get our gas and how do we do it tactically. So I think there's a lot going on there. Yeah, we still have a lot of work to do, but it has really come to the forefront of how we think. on an expeditionary scale.
Yeah, I would offer too, from an information warfare perspective, we're partnered with Military Sea Lift Command and the Warfighting Development Center on how we deliver assured C2 for them, but that they're not overlooked as part of that consideration in terms of the resiliency they need in order to be expeditionary. And so there's been a lot of work, as folks up here have said, in the last year in our war games and exercises on how we're inclusive because we realize how vital that capability is.
Comfair West, CTF 73, Admiral Noodle Melson. We're all paired with the surface for Western Pacific. So this is not a white card war game event. That we're working on.
Okay,
All right,
sir.
thank you.
Yes, Rick Easton, retired surface warfare officer, and thank you for the panel's insight today. Admiral Whitesell, I believe you mentioned that ready relevant learning had not delivered much, at least for the aviation forces. I'm interested as to why that is, if you think the problem's being fixed, if there's a workaround, and if maybe those resources should be invested someplace else. And I'm particularly interested in what the SWO boss and the rest of the panel, from a train perspective of the man, train, and equip, think about that.
Yeah, so the first thing for us is I needed to have it delivered in the DMOT rates, the ADs, AEs, AEM, AOs, and AT side of the house. The initial infrastructure, the idea was actually correct. The 3-star standing up when he was a 3-star at the time stood it up, and the concept was the enlisted training will follow the same way the aviation training is. His quote was, only 18% of us stay in for 20 years, so why do I put 100% of the training in an enlisted kid's life the first 2 years of his life? The ready relevant learning piece had become so bureaucratic that it needed a deconstruction into what we did with NSSA P2P, where we needed to build a problem-solving process to bring everyone together to understand where their interconnection was in ready relevant learning. That occurred, the aha moment occurred down at ITSEC this past a couple months ago down in Orlando. That was the genesis for Summit number 1. And lo and behold, we found out that the Navy, Naval Aviation, was part of a problem, because in the curriculum development, we were loath in providing true experts to understand what curriculum development required. You develop the curriculum, you send it down to NOC TSD Orlando, they approve the curriculum, you send it back to the TICOM, and the TICOM goes, that process took 1.5 years to 2 years, and they go, you're already late to need, and your curriculum was what the Wright brothers needed back then. So now we've streamlined the process through this first summit. Summit number 2 is going to follow about 2 months later, and the idea, at least for naval aviation, is to move our DMOT rates, move them incredibly forward left of timeline so that they do support air wing of the future right now. So it just took critical review, process review, to move it right now. For our contractor and industry side of the house, you guys should be lining up right now on MR, the mixed reality, the augmented reality, the AV side of the house, and what can you deliver that has nothing to do with the brick and mortar side of the house, so that you can give these kids, they can get the valid training in their goggles. I see what industry's doing. GE, I've watched how they work on engines there. The technology is out there. We just need to tell you exactly how we need to apply it in the Navy. Good question.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Eric Florence. I'm with Veracode, and we do application security testing. One of the things you guys talked about were people are critical to readiness, and training is underestimated, especially in cyber. And you need to be self-sufficient and have the right skills at scales. So what is the biggest challenge that you have in turning that into a reality?
I think for me, and I mentioned it before, that my biggest challenge from a training perspective is the training environment. I need a place where my sailors and officers, civilians, contractors can fully exploit the capabilities that we're offering them. And so we are pressing hard to get into the virtual environments where we can replicate and connect the existing capability we have and really let folks loose in terms of working with everything the system has to offer. We're limited in those opportunities now. We have a very rich workup cycle, especially afloat. But because we're off the United States coast, there are some limits sometimes to what we can actually employ. And so some of our sailors don't actually learn the true extent of some of the capability available to them, at least in information warfare, until they're actually out in the theater. And we'd certainly like to make sure they have that opportunity before they're actually on the far end in operations. And I'd also like to see us get in that environment too, because we don't have an ability to evaluate concurrent employment of all those systems and how everybody brings greater capability to bear when you employ stuff concurrently. We guess on a lot of that right now. And so that for me is the challenge of pressing how fast and rapidly we can get into that kind of training environment to really lift everybody's game.
I think for the surface community, I think one of the issues right now is the individual training. I think we do a very good job at team training. When we talk about RRL, one of the concerns I have that we've been looking at hard is the accession training. You know, how do you build up an individual sailor, then you introduce them to that team? And then I think on top of that is how do you track that sailor's progress and their proficiency and experience as they move through the continuum, you know, and they move through their career. And so that's one of the areas we've been focused on is what is our measurements of effectiveness so we can go back and adjust and we can make sure we're delivering the right training at the right time in their career path. And so those are the two things I would say are holding us back, I think, from being better.
Anybody else? Go ahead, Keith.
Sir, I'll take two things. One on a personal level. You know, we recently stood up a Naval Special Warfare Assessment Command to get after some of the things I think the SWO boss was getting at. How do you have to measure? And what are those tools, you know, to measure we're training the right things, and that's working. So we stood up an entire command really to get after assessments. It's something we haven't always been that great at, frankly. But we wanted to put the right level of focus and attention on it. The other thing we're doing on an individual level is this, we call it the continuum of leader development, where, you know, it's an oversimplification, but think 360-degree feedback. In my own case, I think I was probably 16 years in the naval service before I ever got 360 feedback. And now, you know, if you're part of our team, you're getting it from day one. You'll probably get it 7, 8 times just going through the pipeline. So what that does is I think that supports the Get Real, Get Better program. You're constantly, you know, having a tough conversation or a developmental conversation with your people and assessing what's working. On the team training side, I'll tell you where we're maybe falling a little short is how do we replicate adversarial defensive systems and those sorts of things so that we can pressure test our tactics, techniques, and procedures to make sure that they'll work. And that's difficult. And we're working with industry partners to try and do that. But you know, it's expensive, and I think there's opportunity there. Thank you.
So,
Go
Submarine
ahead, Jeff.
Force.
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Sir. Hey, for the submarine force, I'm very happy with our individual training and our submarine multi-mission team trainers. The submarine multi-mission team trainers are very, very high fidelity, that replicate the combat control systems and sonar systems that we have on board our submarines for the technical insertion and advanced processor builds. What we're lacking is some of the submarine learning centers have not been able to upgrade their systems to the latest and greatest in every build. So we're getting after that, but I think we're falling behind a little bit about that. For Admiral David's 360 feedback, one of the things that we implemented in the submarine force this year is we've now instituted 360 feedback for our department heads during their command quals. We've never had that before, and we're actually taking after the NSW community and doing that and seeing great strides from that.
Great. Lieutenant, go ahead.
Good morning, Lieutenant Paul Williams, Cryptologic Warfare Activity 67. I'm currently a cyber warfare engineer, but I was also a submariner in a past life. Bringing those two perspectives together in the Fort Meade bubble that I'm living, I'm noticing a gap in communications between cyber and the afloat maritime environment. It seems to be an either or. What are some things or some conversations that that can be had to link those two environments so that we more effectively apply cyber when looking at the maritime environment?
Great
Can I answer that for the submarine force?
Yeah, go ahead.
So Admiral Houston and I have placed cyber as a priority in the submarine force, and one of the things that we did this year is implement a cyber pilot where we've actually had a cyber watchstander on board. Never had that before in the submarine force. Really positive feedback from that pilot from our crews, and what we are implementing now is for our ITS rate, our information technology rate, is we are going to split them up into EW, comms, and cyber. And now there will actually be a cyber watchstander across all the submarines based on that pilot.
I would just offer that part of it's in how you define cyber. I think cyber is very well integrated in everything that we do. We need to continue to lean in on proficiency, practice, routinization of the importance of cybersecurity, cyber hygiene, and all of that. I think what you're getting at is what's the application of actual cyber capability in the maritime. We have an investment in the Cyber Mission Force where we have very clear operational requirements. I think in the maritime, we are still maturing and developing how we might integrate cyber capability, and we have a lot of discussion going on right now on what we call fleet non-kinetic effects teams, where we're evaluating what we do from an information warfare perspective afloat. We are looking at investing in more capacity for EW, for cyber, for IO, with an anticipation of some of the capabilities like directed energy that we talked about, and what we might also need to do, not just on the net, but at the net, and the unique access we bring from the maritime. So I think we're progressing in that area. We've got a study ongoing this year looking at that capability and the integration. So I think there's active discussion. I think there have been challenges on cyber with authorities, I think, that have held us back, and rightly we haven't thrown a lot of energy in investing in a capability that we might not actually have the authority to execute afloat. I think that's maturing also, and that environment and that opportunity is changing. We're seeing similar progress, I think, on the space side. So I think there's a really healthy dialogue on that, and we are looking at how we capitalize on, frankly, we deliver world-class cyber capable individuals, and we are looking hard at, how do we ensure we capture that both in our tactical units and at the operational level in our mocks.
Thanks for the question. Yes, sir.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for the panel. I'm Warrant Officer Harris. I'm currently stationed aboard the USS Essex as the Information Systems Officer. Our unit is currently in the shipyard, and manning at the unit level is always a major issue for us in most of the ships on the waterfront. Even more so during the maintenance period, as personnel are constantly pulled for TDYs. Many of these sailors are being pulled short notice after an arduous cycle. Many of them haven't done extended deployment and a workup cycle, and then along with that, any type of other sustainment tasking up until that shipyard cycle begins. We've been tapped several times personally to support specific requirements for TDYs, which is, of course, understandable. With the amount of unit-level responsibilities, required training, and the restore of our equipment, is there something in place to ensure that when units hit the actual shipyard period, that the units that do require, additional manning, that we can also keep the manning on board these ships that are in the shipyard manned to an acceptable level? Because at the present moment, we're fighting to also send those same sailors TDY. When they get back, we need to send them to school for follow-on training to light off the same systems that are getting revamped in the shipyard. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, really good question, and thanks for asking it, because it's a really important issue that the Navy and the surface community spend a lot of time on. Right now it's a lot of gaps at sea. We don't have enough people in the Navy right now, and we have a lot of people that we can't move around. We call it the friction, but it's the people we can't put back on ships. And so what do we do? Well, for the first time, as the guy that does the man train and equip for the surface community, we're always pushing for 100% manning. And I think everybody's lined up to do that now. The problem we're having right now is we're having a hard time bringing people in. So what do we do in the interim? So to address your question, your direct question about, hey, do we have a threshold that we won't let your ship go below in the shipyard? Yeah, we do. That's a recent thing, probably about 6 months, but we came up with, okay, we're not going to let a ship drop below this. There's a red line, because we know that coming out of the maintenance period and going in the basic phase is critical. And in the past, and we still do it, but we're trying to lessen the numbers where we take people from the maintenance phase and we marry them up with a deploying ship at around the comp 2X time, so they get the full training, go on deployment, and come back. But if you do that too much, to your point, that's also slowing down force generation because you don't have that connectedness of the team there. And so one of the things we just did was with the Nimitz Strike Group, we actually said, okay, we need to reduce the number of TEMADs because we want to spread the inventory that we have to distribute across the whole OFRP through maintenance, basic, deployment, and sustainment. And so we looked at reducing the number we're required to have. Really, we didn't reduce it. We just said, hey, if we bring in this many people this year, it takes about 2 years for those people to show up on the ship, right, as you go through all your training. So we just adjusted, our target, kind of trailing the target by 2 years, and said, as long as we have the right NECs, focused on that, do you have the right people to get your ship underway and do it? And that's allowed us to drop it a little bit and allow us to get more people in the maintenance phase. But in my opinion, those are good ways to address the distribution problem of what we have. But in the end, we need to bring in more people, quite frankly, so that we don't get in the situation that you're describing. So yeah, there's a lot of efforts right now to minimize those impacts. But I'm going to tell you, we need to bring in more people.
Thank you for your time, sir.
You bet.
You okay with that answer, Will? You want to follow up?
Actually, I do. I didn't want to take too much of your time, but I'm going to go ahead and keep talking about it. So for that response, and I understand that the panel, you guys have a lot more to deal with than unit-level responsibilities, but I'm speaking strictly from the deck plates. When our sailors get to the ship every morning and they see the amount of sailors dwindling down every day, not only is that a deterrent for good order and discipline and morale, they're wondering who's next, right? And that is an uneasy feeling for E5 with 3 kids and all types of responsibilities before they even walk on the ship to have. And my major concern is I can't, confidently tell them you're not next after doing 12 months of workups, deployments, and other responsibilities, which I know they for a fact understand their responsibilities, but that's a hard pill to swallow. So.
Yeah, so you're looking for more predictability.
Correct.
In the TEMADs is what you're saying.
Yes,
yeah,
sir.
so we probably ought to talk afterwards if you're getting told within 48 hours that a sailor needs to go somewhere.
Yes, sir.
It's not how it should work.
That happened 2 days ago.
Okay, so let's talk afterwards.
Yes, sir.
There you go. All right. Looks like you got a question? Go ahead.
Good morning. Thanks for everyone for being here today. Jason from Siena Government. With the flow of data and information being critical to the decision-making ability for leaders at all levels, and the massive increase of the data that's obtained from manned and unmanned platforms. So, David, you had mentioned about, you kind of almost alluded to unmanned platforms aren't as unmanned as you would think, and trending in the right direction. I'd also say wireless networks aren't as wireless as most people think either. How do you prioritize the requirement for improvements in core network infrastructure to handle this growing need for bandwidth?
I may have been the only one who didn't hear you clearly at the end with the question. Could you just get a little closer and ask the question?
Sure. Sink down a little bit. How do you handle the need for core infrastructure to handle the bandwidth requirements that are coming from all these new platforms that just continue to grow and grow and grow?
We have a lot of work to do in that area. I think part of it is because we're still learning in some cases how demanding the bandwidth requirements are. I'm partnered with the Air Boss right now on Triton, where that is really helping us better understand what's required from an architecture standpoint to effectively operate the vehicle. And then, as you point out, there are multiple sensors on board Triton that also require movement of data and then processing ashore. And so we do put a lot of thought, I think, into that coordination. But I think we're going to have to continue to lean in because we want to deliver multiple unmanned vehicles into environments and do, I think, really complex manned and unmanned integration. And I don't think we have a good sense yet of how that will pressurize the architecture, but there is a lot of thought that's going into that. We have more to do, too, I think, in the investment. Somebody talked about, I think it was Karsten, talked about robotics. But I think we've got more discussion to do just in the unmanned concept overall on how do we manage all that data We don't have data science training or data scientists field in our groups, and I think we've got to consider, how are we managing all the data? Where is it actually stored? Because the capacity, particularly afloat, is finite. Where do we want it to go? How do we access and process it? So I think we've got healthy dialogue about that, but I would agree with you that there is some risk for us in how it pressurizes the existing architecture and then how we prioritize what's going to have to be done over that. But a lot in motion right now, especially in the coming year, I think, in terms of experimentation, to really shake that out across the force.
Well, and I think it's also important that we be prepared to operate in a degraded environment, right? So that for the stand-in force, that's one of the things we're bore-sighted on, and it's and we're making Marines actually train in the exercises and the experimentation we're doing. We're actually making them perform in a DEDL environment, and it's proven real challenging.
Yeah. Just as a follow-on, the Air Boss reminds me that we certainly have a lot in motion with the Navy's operational architecture and Project Overmatch. Doug Small, NAVWAR, I think a lot of stuff that's going on there is also aligned and includes as one of the lines of effort the unmanned piece of how do we consider that integration and what that demand is going to be across the architecture going forward.
Well, thanks, Kelly, for closing us out there with an answer. Ladies and gentlemen, you got a follow-up?
Just a quick follow-on question. The United States is responsible for about 10 to 15% of the chip industry globally. So the CHIP Act will kind of help with that, but with China's domination in that and with a modern warfighter and the technology and the microchips that are involved in this, I mean, a modern vehicle, car, automobile has thousands of chips in it. So in terms of production and manufacturing at the core level of our technology, just kind of what are your thoughts on where we stand on core material for technology? Thank you.
I would just say that's another piece of the industrial base, right, that we've been kind of all talking about, and an absolutely vital component of it. I mean, what you talked about is so broad, but it impacts virtually every domain and every piece of equipment.
Yeah, that's a question that is being asked at the highest levels in the acquisition force today. So I think you'll see and read more about that in the probably weeks, if not months ahead. Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for your coming out today. Thank the panel for a great discussion. So I'll turn it back over to Bill.
I won't be here next year.
On behalf of the Naval Institute and AFCEA International, I want to thank Admiral Moran, our panelists, and also all of you for the great questions you asked. This was a really frank and open dialogue and discussion. Before you go to lunch, I ask you to please go into the West app and provide some feedback on the panel conversation today. And as a gift, as a thank you to our panel members, we've got a Naval Institute book, Fire on the Water by Robert Haddock. So one more round of applause for our panel, please. For you.